Welcome to the Menstruality Podcast, where we share inspiring conversations about the power of menstrual cycle awareness and conscious menopause. This podcast is brought to you by Red School, where we're training the menstruality leaders of the future. I'm your host, Sophie Jane Hardy, and I'll be joined often by Red School's founders, Alexandra and Shani, as well as an inspiring group of pioneers, activists, changemakers, and creatives to explore how you can unashamedly claim the power of the menstrual cycle to activate your unique form of leadership for yourself, your community, and the world. Hi there, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome back to the podcast. Today we are in the terrain of the inner autumn, the pre-menstrual phase of the menstrual cycle, which for many of us can be a provocative time, messy and painful, a time where old traumas and wounds can surface. And for some, this becomes deeply debilitating and disruptive. And our guest today, Menstrual Cycle Support founder Kate Shepherd Cohen, shares so generously about her personal experience of PMDD, Pre-Menstrual Dysphoric Disorder, and how menstrual cycle awareness gave her the skills to manage the fear, the rage, the sense of meaninglessness that can arise in the premenstruum so that she could find the power within these experiences. So this is part 2 of my conversation with Kate, who is a graduate of our Menstruality Leadership Programme and the founder of this groundbreaking course, which is bringing menstrual cycle awareness to thousands of people through social prescription via the NHS here in the UK. It's tremendous. There's so much permission and relief in this tender and heartwarming conversation. I particularly loved how Kate explored PMDD as a signal of our power awakening, and her moment of tender premenstrual insight on the sofa, which is one that I imagine you'll be able to relate to. I definitely could. So thanks for being with us today, and let's get started with From PMDD to Power and Ending Menstrual Suffering with Kate Shepherd Cohen. Oh, hi, Kate. It's wonderful to be back with you. It's lovely to be with you today.
Yeah, it's so good to be back. Thank you for inviting me to come back and have another deep dive conversation.
Yeah, see where we are 2 years on from the initial conversation we had. Before we get into that, though, it would be good to hear, great to hear how you are. I think you're on day 23. How's that feeling for you today?
Yeah, so today I am day 23. So it really couldn't be better timed to have a conversation about PMDD and power and suffering. And where am I? I'm really noticing the shift and a change in my body in this place, in the autumn place. And it almost feels like a hollowing out of my body, or like as though my body is beginning to show there's almost like holes, and in that feeling I can feel lots of old wounds just sort of becoming more noticeable, metaphorically speaking, and it's quite, there's, it's like holding a sense of a little bit of panic there of, that there's something happening here. My ego definitely is beginning to dissolve, and just really staying present to that, holding the tension of that. And it's not easy. It's not easy.
No, ego dissolution. It's never easy.
No.
Yeah, how beautiful. Well, firstly, to feel the depth that you go to in yourself when you do a check-in. I could watch you journeying inside. It's very moving, and it takes me more inside myself. And maybe our listeners could also pause for a moment and follow Kate's impulse and just check in. How are you doing cyclically? What day are you on if you're tracking your menstrual cycle? With whatever cycles you're tracking in your life, how is it impacting you? It's such a profound practice, and particularly in the premenstruum when the ego is often kicking and screaming in the face of the coming dissolution. It's not easy. I'm at the apex of the ego in my cycle.
Yeah.
I'm on day 15 and something's changing where I'm not able to track when I'm ovulating anymore. I used to have a pain and I haven't had it for the past few months, which is, I guess, is good, but it was helpful in terms of me understanding what was happening in my body. So all I know is I'm full of energy and I'm very outer focused, and my body's starting to show me that it's too much. So we might be about to turn into autumn.
Mm.
But yeah, just the impulse to go, go, go and do is very strong in me in this inner summer place. Yeah. So,
Mm.
in our first conversation, which I really want to recommend that people listen to along with this, it was episode 11, so 2 years ago. This is going to be episode 140, 150 something.
Wow. Wow.
So that was called How Menstrualism Can Birth Social and Environmental Change. It was an epic conversation. And we looked at how, yeah, your journey through menstrual suffering, how it awakened this calling to end this suffering for everyone. And then what you've done with that calling, creating menstrual cycle support, how it became the first program of this type to be rolled out through the NHS, which is hugely groundbreaking. Your TED talk, which was called
Yes. Period problems and why there's hope.
Yes,
Yeah. I think that was it. Yeah.
and this movement, menstrualism, this social movement, this cultural trend, cultural evolution of feminism, I think you called it. So please do go back and listen to that. It's a fantastic conversation. And today we're going to check in about how is menstrual cycle support going. You've just done your first impact report. I can't wait to hear about it. And I would also, because of the depth of your practice, Kate, I'd also really like to unearth more of your menstruality wisdom. Like we really looked at your menstrual visionary explorations last time.
Mm.
And today, as you mentioned, PMDD power, we're going to look more at the premenstruum. So wonderfully, you're on day 23.
Mm. Yeah.
So on your website, your personal website, you have this section called Courageous Gratitude. And one of the courageous gratitudes that you share is for surviving and for my years of PMDD and PTSD that followed. And I wonder if you could walk us into that time and perhaps through the lens of menstrual cycle awareness and how it supported you through that.
Mm. I think if I just come back into where I am today and my day 23 and how I just described the experience of it, and it just leads me into a huge sense of compassion for my younger self, because the feeling I'm having right now today is really scary. It's a scary feeling. It's very unsettling. And it is dysphoria. It is dysphoric. It is a feeling of unease in myself. And which is very different actually to day 14 or 15. And I don't know if this is where you are, but if we think about the word euphoria, this is sort of an intense feeling of happiness and self-confidence and yeah, and I'm not feeling those things. And so I have a real sense of compassion when I look back at my younger self, because I had no language, I had no guidance in myself, no support around me to be able to say, let's just sit with this feeling. It's okay. Hold the tension. This feeling of hollowing, I think I described it as like hollowing out. I had it last night actually, and nighttime is where it just really comes into, everything sort of lights up for me. There's no distractions anymore, of course. So, and I had it last night, and that hollowing feeling just felt like there was no purpose in the world. It was nihilistic. There's no point. There's no sense to anything. And again, last night, hold the tension. I'm in my inner autumn. This emptiness that I'm feeling is the terrifying feeling of emptiness is where the light is going to come in. Hold it.
Mm.
Hold the tension. without that language and without knowing that I was in my inner autumn and that this is something that I can move through, I have the strength and capacity to move through every month, the world becomes an extremely unfriendly place. And, PMDD kind of rolls on, that feeling of emptiness and dysphoria rolls on. It's not just 1 or 2 days that I now have this kind of day 23, 24, 25. It becomes like almost like half of the cycle and beyond that, because it spills over, this feeling of uncontrollable fear. And that's before we've even added in the rest of the world, the stress of the world, uh, children, noise, old traumas coming to the surface. So I'm extremely grateful when you asked me that question about, that journey, just to be where I am right now, and so grateful to this work to be able to name it beyond a diagnosis of PMD, beyond that, to name it as something huge, a power that is moving through me on day 23.
Sometimes it's like I can feel our audience listening. I can feel the people listening, and the sense I'm having is of profound relief for what you've named, because how many of us have those hellish moments, and I choose that word deliberately, in autumn, where the meaning is lost. And I'm also thinking of our listeners who are in the years running up to menopause and are in menopause and are in an elongated phase often of meaninglessness. That limbo place is the way you contextualized it. I feel relief in my body, even from my robust day 15 in a summer place. The relief I feel, it's huge medicine for all of us.
It is. And again, I would go back to just, and then this is so key, isn't it, with menstrual cycle awareness, just coming back. And we set some intentions before this, before the conversation, we began recording, and just, what really came to me was just to stay present. And actually this coming up again now, so this description of this sort of the wounds, I think I said, coming to the surface. And I think this time in our cycle, this inner autumn phase, the premenstrual phase, they are there. They're these wounds, these old traumas, suddenly become very present, and that's painful. It's really painful to kind of first of all remember, oh gosh, they're still there, and also that they can still be so affected by our own voice and the outside world. And what I've increasingly learned is to invite that in, so not resist it, say, okay, here they are. And I've worked with those wounds, and I'm sure, and there's still plenty of work to do, for sure, but I've really worked through those. I've really sat with those old stories of what's happened to me in the past. I've begun increasingly to think more about, to take the blame away from myself, that things that have happened to me that I've done in my lifetime, and start to think more about my ancestral line, and the world itself. But herein lies exactly what happens in the inner autumn when that ego dissolves. The weight of the world is also there. It's also there. So yeah, I think this journey for me has been about getting to know these wounds and not being so scared of them, and recognizing them and naming them and being with them and holding the tension of them. And that enables me to move through the cycle, witnessing the awakening of the power that it brings with it.
Yeah, and without this language, I think that power can feel so raw and destructive. Actually, I've told this story before, but I just feel like it's helpful for some reason because I think we've all had these moments. When I was probably 30 or 31, and this was at the height of my premenstrual suffering, my ex-husband, who was a wonderful man, he said something, and what he said awoke deep traumas in me around the masculine and abusive experiences from the past around the masculine. And I found myself in floods of tears, and I couldn't be inside. I had to be outside. It was pouring with rain. But I often experience this in inner autumn. I'm curious if you do too, that I need to be in nature because it's big enough to hold the wild force pushing through me. So I went outside and I was underneath the apple tree that was in our garden, and it was pouring with rain, and there was mascara streaming down my face, and my tears were mingling with the rain, and I was actually clawing the earth. I was so desperately in pain. And it was when you mentioned the ancestral piece, it was my pain, and it was unfelt past pain. This is my dreaming. I don't know what it was, but that's what it felt like. That it was more than my pain roaring through me. It was the pain of all the women who had been abused. That's what it felt like. And yes, without the context of knowing this is inner autumn, this is there is medicine here. It kind of roared through me unheld, uncontained, without my capacity to hold the tension. And yeah, the way you're saying that menstrual cycle awareness holds us, contextualizes. It's not that it necessarily makes sense of, but it contains.
Yeah, it does. And just a couple of things really come through for me listening to your story. One is is Alexandra um, saying, or it's something that Alexandra says. She says that, PMDD is a real power awakening. And that really spoke to me at the time because it was so different to the pathological route that I was being pushed along with a diagnosis of PMDD, a disorder. So yeah, you have dysphoria, and it's disorder because it's just there's sort of the container's not there, and it's impacting everything. And something that your stories come through is that actually how wonderful to have that space in the garden to claw at the earth and just feel that full force of power. And when we take this big power into our world and we're having to look after others, as we've all experienced this really premenstrually, it comes out as complete rage, and negatively impacts others. And I think the guilt of that, actually, for me, if I think about the guilt that I have felt when that rage almost feels like it has no container or space any longer, and it's like fury just unleashing on everyone and everything, including
Yes.
myself. Guilt comes in and shame, and that's where PMDD for me wasn't just a few days a month. It was so much longer. That's what I was talking about, where it just kind of spread through. And then even when I'd come through my period, it didn't necessarily go away, the feeling, because I was then coming through and thinking, oh my gosh, what did I do? What have I done? And then and then it just is on repeat. So when this power doesn't have a place to go, it begins to sort of implode in a way. That was my experience.
Yeah.
And it is power. PMDD is a signal to power awakening. As Alexandra had said to me many years ago, she validated my experience beyond something that needed curing or medicating or fixing. Like, oh, I was curious, is this a power? What? And it is. And so, um, yeah, it's really difficult, isn't it, to distinguish this power that we're speaking about, and then the rage and the how horrible it actually is when you experience it, when it inflicts pain on others, and you can witness the pain you're inflicting on others. Um, it's it's extremely hard. This is not a one-woman show, and actually the menstrual cycle isn't. This isn't an individual experience. This is something where we all support one another. The family ideally can support you, and where I would just take that, of course, is through MCA, is that resting deeply in inner winter is the thing that actually starts easing it. Then that's how I can sit here now and hold the tension, because I have the resources of that deep rest that I've taken last winter and the winter before, the inner winter. Deep rest. Yeah.
And the context for this for you is that you have 3 children
Yeah.
and you're doing this big work with menstrual cycle support. So there's a lot that you're tending to in your world. And they're just two of the things that I imagine that you're tending to in your life. So there's a lot that you're holding for others. And yeah, thank you for
Mm.
always the reminder that it's the rest that makes the power possible in the cycle. And I would love to track with you, if this is possible. This might be my like inner summer euphoria. I try to think we can do the impossible, but to track somehow how the the suffering and the power that was pushing through you through the PMDD times, how that has transmuted into, or how some of that has transmuted into the gold that we're seeing today with what you're doing with menstrual cycle support.
I mean, I think first and foremost, when you find a practice that actually is incredibly simple, as so many of us have experienced when we've encountered menstruality for the first time. I've seen it myself in teaching and facilitating the work. There's a penny drop moment of, oh right, okay, oh, we're cyclical, oh right, there's the seasons, oh okay, there's different energies. I think because it was revolutionary to me, this idea that there was this container of the menstrual cycle. There's such a deep truth, a truth that I'd never heard anywhere else before from the teachings from Red School, that was so relatable, and I think then, because it had such a revolutionary effect, and by revolutionary effect I mean I don't have PMDD anymore. I didn't go down the medical route. Now, that's not to say those that are choosing that route is not. I'm not sitting here in any judgment at all, because we all take our own routes to finding the way through for healing. So I would say that. But I wanted to, because it had been so revolutionary for me, and had awakened the power in a way that I could hold, more than that, appreciate and enjoy, and actually find a sense of euphoria somewhere in the dysphoria of
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
I wanted to share it with as many people as I could. But I'd also really noticed that, it wasn't like enough just to share it with individuals. I wanted to really, I had a real calling just to change the system, to change the way that I had been pathologized, which of course I hear so many other people share similar stories, where I'd gone in to see the doctor, and I was diagnosed with long-term depression, and prescribed medication, and had gone to different therapists over the years, as well as the same experience as going to see the doctor. And not one person had ever asked me where I was in my menstrual cycle. Nobody had ever made a connection between my experience and the menstrual cycle. And I really wanted to change that, because it felt like a very simple thing to really, in theory, would be a simple thing to change.
I've just got head to toe shivers. just so,
I'm shaking
wow,
as
it's just
well.
it's incredible, isn't it? Because we're so immersed in this work, but it's the most obvious thing to us. Okay, where are you at in your cycle? How is that impacting? But of course, it isn't in the mainstream, and that's where your calling is changing everything. Yes, yes. Okay, so you're with the doctor. No one asked you where are you at in your cycle. Yeah.
Yeah, no one had ever asked me that question. I'm really hopeful that that's actually really shifting now, because of all of the work that we're all doing.
And
Um,
actually, the menopause work is shifting it too, I think, because there
mm,
is there's loads more work to be done, but there's so much more understanding now of the impact of menopause, and that policy is changing slowly. And I just feel like that's going to trickle down into the menstrual cycle too. Yeah.
I think so, yeah. I mean, you'd hope so, wouldn't you? Because it's a good 40 years that we have a menstrual cycle. um, good half the population. So yes, it would be good to have more focus on the menstrual cycle. But even the fact that actually my program through Menstrual Cycle Support, which really is teaching menstrual cycle awareness. The very sort of tip of the iceberg of menstrual cycle awareness. So just grounding people in what day they are, how is it making them, how do they feel in themselves, and can they start to chart that in a way that feels good for them, as simple as an emoji, um, and then after three cycles of tracking to start to recognize patterns, then you can actually go, what's normal for me. So that's really the level that I'm teaching. Ultimately, part of that is to then speed up getting the support that they need to recognize, okay, actually, I'm getting 2 weeks a month, I'm feeling really, really bad. Because my experience was I didn't know that my symptoms were cyclical for a very long time. I just thought there was something wrong with me. So I hadn't even thought about my period. I really didn't know. And it was only when my box of antidepressants sort of sat unopened that, and I must have come through my period, that I realized that I felt differently. And then I just felt shame, oh God, this is just my period. Oh God, that's where the work really began, of like unpicking and unpacking that relationship with my cycle. I did look for different ways of training doctors initially, but what came through is that there wasn't enough data around menstrual cycle awareness at that time, that doctors would be able to use it as a training. Actually, since COVID, the continuing professional development for doctors has changed slightly. So any extra courses they do, classes as CPD, so that's interesting in itself. But when I was first looking, that was the case. I wasn't going to be able to change the training of doctors who you quickly realize don't get very much gynecological training anyway, and you quickly realize that's because they're having to, they're learning an awful lot of other things. I'm not saying it's right that they don't have any gynecological training, but also, it was a more challenging route in for me. And that led to a conversation about creating a course that could be available for patients. And that's where, just fortuitously, or perhaps as was destined by the universe, and through many months of kind of tuning in to my own calling through my menstrual cycle, this opportunity came up of putting it into the NHS on social prescription.
Hey, I'm going to pause for a moment. We have an invitation for you, particularly if you're feeling called to connect to your menstrual cycle more deeply, perhaps because you recognize the kind of premenstrual challenges that Kate's describing in this episode today, or you're navigating other menstrual health symptoms, or you're simply passionate about the menstrual cycle because of a deep knowing or an inner yes that you're feeling. If so, we'd love to invite you to join our Menstruality Leadership Programme. We start in February next year, in 2025, And we're hosting a free introductory webinar on July the 25th, all about the menstrual cycle and leadership. And we'll also tell you all about the programme. You can ask any questions that you have. You can register for the webinar and find out all about the Menstruality Leadership Programme at menstrualityleadership.com. Okay, let's get back to our conversation with Kate. When you say through the process of working with my cycle and hearing my calling, I'd love to unpick that a little bit because I know so many of our people listening are inside this process. Me too. My calling's telling me something really new this past year, and I'm like, okay, I'm like decoding something new now. What did that look like for you? Because I imagine there's a tangle of shame in there still, because there's still healing going on, but there's also something pulling you from the outside. You're seeing that this suffering needs to end. Could you walk us into that a little bit? What did it feel like and sound like inside you?
Well, in a way, it's almost like redirected rage, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the kind of like, okay, right, I know that we've got this huge amount of anger that I was feeling, like all of that power, and sort of redirecting it into a place of like using that anger as a source of saying, I'm going to get out there and change the world. I feel incited to, I feel this is injustice.
Yes.
This hasn't all just, this is not all me. This is not my fault. Like there's an injustice here. I'm not disordered. Actually, I was beginning to see how I was completely unsupported. Never had any support with my menstrual cycle. Didn't have any support through the abusive experiences I'd had. Everything had just been sort of hidden down, but the PMDD wasn't allowing it to be hidden anymore. It's like it's like it's coming out, and then being able to sort of see the wood for the trees in a way through the deep rest, and then using that sense of injustice to go out and say, do you know what, I'm going to go and change the system here. So there's that piece, and then there's a much gentler piece, which is the calling that comes through the deep rest, which for me, as we spoke about in our last podcast, is the visionary experience. The with deep rest, I was able just to dream, and in dreaming, I was beginning to see. And I think I told you this story before, but it's a story I will tell again because it's sort of a motif that has come through over many years of this journeying into my womb space and visualizing being inside my womb and seeing the sword and the stone, seeing in a big piece of granite or sarsen stone, huge standing stone, and then with the sword in it. And I took the sword out. I mean, at the time, I think I did it while I had like really bad period pain. I was really journeying into this period pain I was feeling. And I took the sword out and I realized that that was the sword of suffering. I had this like sense that this is the sword of suffering I'm holding. And I looked at the standing stone and it was suddenly it represented the pain. And it was suddenly sort of glistering. It was almost had like quartz in it, and it had a real magic to it that took a new it had a new characteristic to it that was very important, and it was something almost to be. I was in awe of it. This pain, I was actually in awe of it, and meanwhile, I'm holding this sword of suffering, and coming through that vision, I had a real sense of clarity that my role was to end menstrual suffering. And that turned into then being the strapline for menstrual cycle support. And so that for me is calling, it's that's even the interpretation of it is not sort of necessarily questioning. It was just like going with that sense of clarity that came through on, in that chamber. That clarity and direction was just,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a poetic, mythical experience that we're pointing to. And I think the word motif that you brought in there is really valuable for all of us to sit with and not think about necessarily, but feel into, especially when we are able to claim rest at menstruation. What are the motifs that are coming to me? And often the ones that come back again and again, or the ones that feel especially big. And then it's such a process of believing ourselves and trusting ourselves, isn't it? Trusting that there was something in that experience, and then the trust allows the meaning to be revealed more and more
Mm.
somehow.
I love that. And actually, to anybody who is experiencing or identifies with PMDD, it's that trust in the power that's calling to you. And I feel quite moved by that idea of trusting in ourselves when things are really dark,
Yeah.
and trusting that we can hold it and to move through it, and we're forgiven as well, to forgive ourselves for exploding, which is part of the power of awakening. And we are unsupported, so we don't have that moment of, if only we could just go out and just claw at the earth, Sophie, and under the apple tree. And actually, I think even that is a real sort of invitation. I love that so much, your story of, I'm really going to remember that next time that feeling comes up, of just deep breath and just step out and go, and so that power can be unleashed, because it wants to be. And we need to allow it to be in a safer space as possible. But it's okay if it comes out in other ways, because we're just learning. We're all just learning all the time, aren't we?
I'm seeing a volcano. Like, does a volcano blame itself for erupting?
Mm.
And no,
Uh,
it's like there is a wild power. It's Alexander Shani's book that's pushing through us. And yeah, I feel like we're teasing out two levels of support here. There's the support of the natural world, which is always available, even in the middle of inner city London. There's the sky and there's the earth underneath, and there's usually a park within sort of a 10-minute walk. I've just been in London and it was amazing to feel, yeah, the difference of the energy there, but there are always wild spaces. But also community. Like, I think Red School exists so that people can come and say, I just roared at my partner, family, friend, mum, dad, whoever, from this place of pain and rage, and I feel shame, and I just want to know that there's nothing wrong with me and I'm okay.
mm.
And then we rush in and go, there is nothing wrong with you. You are okay. You are okay.
Yeah, and I think that's it. And we think about the power of the check-in, is how, where it's so useful, is that we're giving ourselves that chance to articulate really deeply how we're feeling, and then having now articulated it this morning with you, I will be able to probably repeat almost exactly what I said, to my husband, and possibly to my children as well, in that kind of like, look, this is actually where I'm at now. So I've empowered myself to think about where I'm at and articulate it in the best way I can, and then share that with others, so that they're and be okay if they say, do you want to take a moment, and to take that moment, because if it's offered. Sophie, I wanted to talk a bit about this word suffering, some more, because as I say, I had really perceived this word suffering through my vision, and ended up sort of questioning that word as I went out into the world, into my spring summer. Oh, hang on. Oh, that was quite a big vision. Okay, what does that actually mean? Oh my gosh, end menstrual suffering. I don't know if me. Um, and I really sort of looked at this word suffering, and it's quite challenging, you know, because do we think, well, hang on, is suffering part of the human condition, just like happiness, sadness, pain, you know, if you end one, will you end happiness? You know, is it not the full spectrum to feel into these things? And actually, I ended up for menstrual cycle support, I've actually used the word ease menstrual suffering, to just as a way of kind of stepping to the side of that questioning around suffering. Now, you know, we could speak a lot more here. Like, is there such thing as unnecessary suffering or necessary suffering? And it's really, we as peaceful as peace activists that we are, all suffering really is unnecessary, we hope. And so yeah, so I had sort of worked around that language a little bit. And then interestingly, as I've taken menstrual cycle support, so a program on menstrual cycle awareness into the NHS, so that, and the calling really was here, so that healthcare professionals could prescribe menstrual cycle awareness alongside, or preferably before, medical intervention, so people can understand their own cycle. And also so that people could do the course before they go and see a doctor, so that they feel more empowered in what they're asking for and what their needs are and what support they need. But it was very interesting, this word suffering, because the clinicians that we worked with to get the program into the NHS prefer the word symptoms. And so they saw suffering and symptoms as synonymous, ease menstrual symptoms. And this is quite an interesting, again, this is a sort of the line, I think, and I'm feeling my way here, Sophie. I haven't fully
Yeah.
thought this through, but before now, but that line again of the pathologization of the experience into symptoms that can be fixed, and suffering, which actually in itself has a more philosophical, we've just spoken a little bit, unnecessary, necessary suffering has more of a philosophical side to it. For me, suffering has been, when I think about my vision, suffering was separating the pain from the experience I was bringing to it.
Yeah, the sword was the suffering and the stone was the pain, and you were creating a distinction. Yeah.
Yeah, and that really helped me through my PMDD time as I was coming into relationship with my daily menstrual cycle. Because when I would be lying on, I had very young children at the time, and when I was be lying on the sofa just thinking, I just can't do this. Now that would very quickly spiral into, I'm a terrible person, I'm a terrible mother, I'm not good enough. Very quickly. And actually, frankly, that goes to, I don't deserve to live. And it's very quick from just lying on the sofa. And so the big shift, and I guess the revolutionary moment, was lying on the sofa and saying, well, last week we were out collecting shells on the beach, and that was lovely. And now I'm in a place of just needing to lie here. And there's such a self-acceptance. And so that suffering was just starting just to move away. So still having to be with the kind of hollowness of lying on the sofa, not feeling up for doing anything, but the suffering of, this is because I'm not good enough to live, just sort of moved to the side. And so that distinction, I think, is and has been very important to me.
Yeah, I'm really present to the space between the stone and the sword, that there's space there. And that when we do this, Alexander and Shani often refer to it as as a mindfulness practice of menstrual cycle awareness. It gives us that buffer of a little bit more space between the thought, the suffering, and then the immediate shaming reaction and the cascade of shaming thoughts. There's a bit more space for you to remember the shell moment was good, and for you to have a moment of self-compassion. And now this is what I need. It's everything. It's the
Mm,
tiniest thing, and it's everything.
it is. Well, it's the difference between living and not wanting to live, and that's the extremity of it, of PMDD. It's the fight of reality, isn't it? There was a real fight there. In a way, I've noticed more. You mentioned about decoding your own calling lately, and I have noticed a shift for me. And it could be as I'm going in now. I'm 43, and my energy is changing. I'm shifting through my life cycle, and what I have really perceived is that there's been a bit of a fight with this sword, that there's an element of warrior energy to it, which I think in a way you need to go and sort of combat the system and change the system. There's more of a gentleness coming in now, and I'm starting to have a different relationship to it in a way, which is still coming through. I don't know what that is yet. I don't know what the future of menstrual cycle, especially on day 23, but I don't know what the future now is for menstrual cycle support. In a way, I felt like everybody needs to know in the medical system that this practice helps ease menstrual suffering. It improves life, and I really set out to do that. And in order to do that, I had to make it as robust as possible. Now, we know who practice it. It's as robust as it possibly needs to be. We know from our own experience, actually, that's really all that counts. But in a way, we're still at a place where in order to get things in the door of like mainstream healthcare, I had to sort of like retrospectively with Red School's blessing to almost retrospectively underpin it with therapeutic and evidence-informed practice, to get clinical backing and input into it, signed off, to get it endorsed by the Royal College of Obstetricians Gynecologists, get the Women's Health Ambassador to endorse it, get all the menstrual health charities involved in it, in order to say, this thing has legs. And it's not going to be any surprise to any of us who practice this that the impact report showed exactly that.
The impact report shows that menstrual cycle awareness eases suffering. This is amazing. But it is amazing. It is.
Yeah, I told you so. But we need it. And actually, it's still the beginning of the journey, because the thing is with the via positiva world, so that the reality that is the current society is, my goodness, you just have to constantly prove. And that's quite exhausting, which is also why I think we come around to our inner autumn feeling pretty exhausted with all of that. I've got nothing more to prove. Like, I am credible as me. I don't need to prove myself anymore. But it's like a constant journey of that. And I'm telling you, that's not been easy, but either. It's like a firewall to go through, to be sitting in a room with MPs and clinical psychologists and research into menstrual pain from Oxford University, and and be questioned in this. It's really really tough, and thank goodness I get that time every month just to go back and just sit with this sword and the stone, and whatever else comes through.
Yeah. I saw it in your TED talk. What I saw is you standing fully in your tenderness. So we could say the via negativa, this energy flow of the second half of the cycle. I can't remember what day you were on in your TED
Yeah, I
talk.
think it was day 6. So I was like in a tender, like, or day 5 or day 6 or something for
There
that.
was such tenderness, but it was, how, I'm trying to think of a metaphor.
Mhm.
A tree really is a good metaphor. I could feel the robustness of your trunk, how rooted you were in your own direct experience, but in all of the research that you were doing to be in this place. And then I could feel the courage of being willing to be vulnerable and share the depth of menstrual cycle. You did it so skillfully in the TED talk, to share the depth of menstrual cycle awareness in a way that was accessible for people. And I am so so grateful. I just speak on behalf of everyone listening now that you were willing and that you have the mind and the mettle and the muscle to be able to sit in those rooms and bring forth what people need to hear in order for this to keep moving. I'm so grateful, Kate. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
And I think that I'm ever willing. This is about doing it together in community, and this work that I've done and the impact report. So the robust data that has come through is independently put together by two academics about menstrual cycle awareness. I really want to make it available for anybody who's working in menstruality. If you're a menstruality mentor, you take it into your work. If you feel like, I mean, we know we don't need it. We can stand and say, we know this works. But if you do feel like you want to just put that bit under it to help it go where it needs to go, then please all get in touch with me. But also it's there on my website, menstrualcyclesupport.com. It's there, and please just use it. This is not mine. This is ours, just as the practice has been.
Yeah. The amount of times Aid has said to me, so one of the things that would really take Red School to the next level is if you had 2 years of qualitative data of interviews with people which showed how their lives have been transformed. And I'm like, I know, but I don't know when we would have find the time to do that. And I think what you're saying is there is this data here now, there
Yeah.
is this report. Could you like summarize what the report says? Could you just highlight what the report holds, in
Mm.
terms of how people could use it and share it?
I think that the main bit that we can share really is that menstrual cycle awareness has been endorsed. This is a really important word. It's been endorsed by the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists about being, to use these words. I'm feeling quite inspired now, actually, from this conversation, just to put this down in a way that can be shared. And I will do that based on what I've done with this work, and that it's available in the NHS already on social prescription. So even that, these words are important. So straight away, even that alone. Then in the impact report that we did, it showed like a very significant positive statistical increase in people's confidence in speaking to healthcare professionals, in people's relationship to their menstrual cycle. But those two big pieces, have the confidence to get the support you need, and your relationship changes. Because what we know is if you have confidence to speak about what you need, it helps you get what you need faster, so you have better health outcomes. And if you have an increased positive relationship to your menstrual cycle, what we know and my whole story has been is that improves the relationship with everyone and everything around you. And the ripple effects are just exponential, aren't they?
Yes. Yes, we've all seen them in our own lives. Everyone's nodding along with you. For
Mm.
people who are thinking, I want to help, I want to contribute to this, I want to be part of this, are there opportunities for people how can they help your work?
Mm. To reach out and get in touch, and let's explore ways that we can work together. I think really, so open to collaboration in this work. And a little bit, I think initially I really set out as a bit alone with a fight, and this utterly senseless. This is a job for us all, and it's working. That's the thing, it's working because all of the doctors that I have spoken to, all of the GP surgeries, so it's in over 500 GP surgeries across the
Wow.
UK, which is astonishing, really. But actually, it was really welcomed because there was a recognition that actually, no, we don't. We have very limited choices of what we can give to our patients. So I think also, if you want to go in and work in your local surgery, particularly through social prescribing, and you want help, if you'd like some help from me and guidance, I'm very willing to give that. And you can contact me through the website.
Great. I'll put the link in the show notes. so that people can. What's next for you? What are you working on at the moment, and what's coming up now with menstrual cycle support and with your work?
Well, I'm interested to see what comes up in the next bleed in next week. Because there was a real sense, we launched a course for teenagers at the House of Commons. So again, this is also extraordinary, really, how that came about. So that's a course on menstrual cycle awareness from anyone aged 13 to 18. And that's really aimed at getting into schools as well. And we worked with lots of schools to develop that. So also there's data here to show that it works across the lifespan. And what's next? I don't really know, because I think I felt like I needed to take my foot off the accelerator a little bit and just take a pause. And that's exactly what I've done. I've just taken a little step back and just take a breath to check in with the calling, because I noticed that it was starting to change a little bit. The relationship to it has changed. And so wanting to ever stay present to that. And who
Because you
knows?
saw what happened last time you listened.
Right,
What
exactly.
could happen now?
Exactly. I'd like to see menstrual cycle awareness continue on its journey into, what I'd love is it for it to be an actual clinical intervention. I see that one day for menstrual cycle awareness. I really do.
Can you just explain the difference between clinical intervention and social prescription?
Yeah, so social prescribing is the phrase that describes when a healthcare professional refers you to a non-clinical treatment in your local community. So, for example, it might be a walking group for
Yeah.
loneliness. So, actually, menstrual cycle support just fits so beautifully into that, because it was a non-clinical. So it had, and so what does non-clinical and clinical mean? If it's a clinical intervention, it's gone through more trials. That's essentially it.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's been tested, there's been a placebo versus a blind testing or like this, so that's a whole other area that actually I don't know a huge amount about, but that's what I really see for menstrual cycle awareness. Although, this is again about, well, how much more do we need to demonstrate? In a way, it's there, it's on social prescribing. There's space for so many more to come in and offer, every surgery in England, certainly, and in Scotland and Wales too, offers some kind of social prescribing. So if you are offering some sort of menstrual support in your local community, you could probably do it through social prescription as well if you contact your local surgery or local social prescribing group. And social prescribing is all over the world now. I think it's in 17 or 18 countries all over the world, including Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and the US. So there's a lot of potential there. Yeah, so I think it's just waiting to see. I still very much feel into this identity of being a menstrualist, and what does that mean? And the idea that we are part of this bigger movement called menstrualism, as you mentioned at the beginning, of this evolution of feminism. And so I'm exploring, researching and writing that, I think, a little bit more as the next steps. So we shall see.
Wow. Well, I'm watching this space. Doing a Substack? A Substack?
Could be. I'll probably have much more certainty in 2 weeks' time than I
Yeah.
do right now, where everything is literally like, I don't really know what's going on or what I'm doing.
And just normalizing that is such a gift right now. This happens I've been lucky to have good conversations with you twice, and both those times I wanted to speak to you again, and I already have many more things that I want to talk to you about. So hopefully we can welcome you back to the podcast again soon. And
That's so good.
yeah, as I said, my gratitude is profound for the courage that it took to take your PMDD journey to the place that you're in now, and then for how you've sat in these rooms and these spaces and done all of this work to profoundly change people's lives. And You go, menstrualist. I'm right there with
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you so much, love, and thank you for today.
Thanks, Sophie. Bye, everyone.
Hey, thanks for being with us all the way through to the end today. I was so touched, so moved by everything that Kate shared about her personal experience with PMDD, but also about how her calling was working her through the rage that she was experiencing and how it continues to work her today. I find that so fascinating. If you know someone that's really struggling with their inner autumn, with the premenstrual phase, please forward this podcast to them. Please share it with them as a way of supporting them. And as always, thank you so much for being part of the community gathered around this work. I'll be with you again next week. And until then, keep living life according to your own brilliant rhythm.